Well, we said that we were going to get to it one day, and so here we go. And I'm fairly certain this will be the first of many. But cryptid fans, this one's for you. You have seen him everywhere. On TV, in books. You might have stumbled into him in a gift shop in Gatlinburg, Tennessee or Estes Park, Colorado. But if you're lucky enough, you might have been out in some remote location in the woods and seen him yourself. That's right, everybody. We're talking about the king of all cryptids himself, Elvis Presley. Nah, I'm just kidding. We're finally talking about Bigfoot. The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest in the world, and we just happen to live in them. One thing we can tell you, there are ghosts in the mountains. This particular story starts a long time ago, and I'll almost bet you money that you haven't heard this one before. The first place I ever heard this story was from my dad, because it was the drummer of his garage band when he was 18 that told him this story, and he was the one that experienced it firsthand. Bruce, also known as the Sarge, and a quick shout out to Bruce. First off, thank you for your service. And secondarily, thanks for letting me play your drums when I was a kid. Bruce was the first person to ever let me play on a full-size drum kit, which subsequently launched a pretty long career of me beating the ever-living shit out of the drums. Something I still do today. Now, my brother, Micah Hanks, has done a hell of a lot of Bigfoot research over the years. So if you really want to dive deep into this stuff, definitely Google him and all of the work that he has done. But being the consummate researcher that he is, the bro had a good enough head on his shoulders to think, hey, maybe I should interview Bruce and record him talking about his experience that he had when he was a kid. And he did just that. Unfortunately, this was at a gathering, and there ended up being a bit too much background noise for me to play the original audio on the show. So, sorry. You're stuck with me telling you the story. Again, I know. Gosh. But don't worry. We'll make it all spooky for you and stuff. It'll be fun. So, let's get into it. Now, Bruce, also known as the Sarge, is the same age as my dad. This took place when he was around 10 or 12 years old, so the year would have been around 1956 or 1958, in a little place called Walnut, which is in the Brush Creek area of Madison County. Now, you may be thinking about the Clint Eastwood film with Meryl Streep, The Bridges of Madison County, but that book takes place in Iowa. So, not the same place. And not to be confused with the lesser-known sequel, and my personal favorite monster film, Gamera vs. The Bridges of Madison County. Sorry, Mystery Science Theater 3000 reference. I mentioned I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was really young, right? So this stuff's gonna happen every once in a while with me, but I'll keep it short. And I apologize ahead of time. So, back to the story. It's summertime in the late 50s in Madison County, North Carolina. Bruce was spending some time at his grandmother's property in Brush Creek, kind of near what is now the Brush Creek Middle School. Now, Walnut, North Carolina is in between Marshall and Hot Springs. And if you've ever been out through there, it can certainly get quite remote. If you happen to listen to our French Broad River Sirens episode, I mentioned that there are some areas around the French Broad River that get pretty wild and unruly, and this is actually not too far from there at all, and namely a place called Stackhouse. And if you've ever walked along the river out there, there are certain portions where it kind of looks like the set of Lord of the Rings. So you certainly have some relatively untamed wilderness, and back in the 50s, there's no doubt that it was even less developed than it is today. So something to keep in mind when we're talking about typical Sasquatch territory. But as the story goes, one summer evening, as the sun was beginning to set, our family friend Bruce was walking up through his family's property. And like many people had at that time, the family had a chicken coop that sat on the property, which eventually led to a cornfield, and then beyond that, there was a bit of a pine thicket. I'm not exactly sure if Bruce heard something, and that's why he headed up towards the chicken coop, or if he just happened to be walking around out there. But whether you would consider Bruce to be really lucky or really unlucky, he just happened to be there in what I would consider the right time. As my brother was interviewing him, this is basically where Bruce starts the story. He said, "Now, the chicken house wasn't very tall. You had to stoop down to get in it, maybe 6.5 feet at most at the roof line. I saw this shadow hanging over the chicken coop. I said, 'Damn.' And so, as I get closer, it's trying to get in the door, trying to stoop down. So I took off running. I haul-ass back." So the next day, my cousin, he was living there. He was a couple years older than me. I told him what happened. So I said, "Let's go look." So we go up there and look. So my grandfather had corn planted all behind the barn. And right through the middle of that thing was a path where something hauled ass all throughout that corn. So we followed through the corn. And we could see where it had hit the bank and gone over, and we looked down, there was a pine thicket there. That is as far as we went. We didn't go down to the pines, he laughed. My brother Micah asked him, "So what did the thing look like?" He said, "The way it moved was slow and deliberate, and was just a shadowy thing like a sloth or something of that nature. It definitely wasn't moving fast, but it was weird." Micah also mentioned to Bruce that he remembered being told this story by Bruce when he was a kid, and he remembered Bruce mentioning something kind of specific about the way that this thing's hands looked, kind of strange looking. My dad and my brother also seemed to remember that there was a detail that the fingers on the hands seemed to look kind of long. But at this point, Bruce doesn't really seem to remember too much about that. And given at this point that this interview was recorded, it had probably been 50 plus years since this occurrence took place. So some of the details probably got lost in the memories over the years. But he says he definitely remembers it trying to bend down to get into the door of the chicken coop, and mentioned that it was definitely taller than the estimated 6-foot tall chicken coop. Micah then asked if he remembered any sort of coloration to the creature, but Bruce said that he wasn't really able to tell too much as the dusk was setting in. But whatever it was that he saw, it scared him badly enough that he still remembers it and talks about it to this day. Now, there's always the chance that there just could have been somebody trying to steal eggs from the chicken coop, but I do find it kind of interesting that the first place that his mind went when trying to identify what he was looking at was a sloth and not a person. That would say to me that even in the dusk of the evening, whatever he saw had a decent amount of hair on it. And well, other than the big feet, that's one of the bigger calling cards for a Sasquatch. Much time has passed since Bruce saw what he saw up there, so who knows what he saw. However, in 2006, some people saw something strange, again, right there in Madison County. A report on the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization website reports that in July of either 2005 or 2006, that 5 people sitting around a campfire, experienced this. It was a damp July night, around 10 o'clock. We were staying at my grandpa's house. My family and I had a fire going outside. We were all sitting around it talking. It rained all day, so the night seemed darker than usual. The house is set on 30 wooded acres with a creek about 25 feet away. There aren't many houses on this mountain due to the fact that it runs with the Pisgah National Forest. I went in the house to get the CD player. It was a very still night. We listened to a few songs when we decided to play the Sierra Sounds CD with Bigfoot recordings on it. As we listened to the CD, we all became jumpy, and the feeling of someone was watching us came over us. Then we started hearing sounds of what sounded like saplings being broken up above us, higher up in the mountain. We just laughed it all off as nerves. Then we heard what sounded like a tree about 10 inches around being broken and then slide down the mountain at us. All of us became scared and ran to the porch of the house for protection. When I saw my cousin, I knew it had to be something. He's in his late 30s and has grown up in the mountains. He is familiar with the animal sounds and the layout of the mountain. I don't know if it was anything or not, but it sure scared the heck out of us. A subsequent note at the bottom of this report, titled Other Stories, says, 2 people, cousin and brother, 2 years before this, were hiking up the mountain across from my grandpa's house when they had a sighting. They got a good look at the creature before they became scared and ran down the mountain. But these stories are not the only ones like this that have been reported in Madison County. On the UNC University Library's website, there's mention of an Asheville Citizen-Times article in 2006 reporting a Bigfoot sighting. Unfortunately, the link to the Citizen-Times article seems to no longer be working. However, I assume that they're probably talking about the occurrence that was reported on the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization website. But there are quite a few comments on this particular blog post. One commenter, posting on April 21st, 2007, says, "Trust me, Bigfoot is real. As we were returning from Glencoe, spelled Glynco, Georgia, my buddy Brian almost hit him on I-26. We had just hit the North Carolina line, and at 75 miles per hour, we nearly slammed him head on. I know in my heart this creature exists. Both me and my buddy agree that a furry creature walking upright and very fast is not an everyday occurrence on the interstate." A post below that in October 2007 says, "As a small child, I remember a tall, hairy creature looking in through an old door that my family was camping in at High Rock Lake in North Carolina. A few years later, a friend and I were riding 4-wheelers on the lake bed and saw several footprints in the road. The prints were a third larger than my size 10 Fox riding boots. Also, this was the middle of the winter. The ground was frozen." Another commenter went on to write, "While camping out at Mountain Island at the French Broad River in Madison County, I had an interesting night. At the time, I knew nothing of Bigfoot. I got intrigued about the subject after visiting a website and playing the recordings. What got my attention was the tree knocking. I have heard this on numerous occasions while on that section of the river, and vaguely wondered who was up on the side of the mountain banging on a tree. I thought maybe someone was setting up a deer stand or something. Anyway, just after sunset, I hear loud splashes in the river. Thought it might be big beavers or something. The splashes were huge. Later on, something kept walking around my campsite. Never did see anything, and wasn't too worried as I was heavily armed. This island is very remote and surrounded by whitewater on both sides. About 3 a.m., a ground-shaking thud woke me up. I got out of the tent and looked around, but it was pitch black out there. I got spooked then. I thought maybe a rock fell off the small cliff back where I was camped out. just before daylight, I heard what sounded like a tree being twisted apart. I got out of the tent and emptied a 30-round clip in the air. Never heard anything else or saw anybody except for the other boaters the rest of the weekend. All of these accounts are pretty interesting to say the least. Now, sometimes when we're out in the woods, we can hear all kinds of sounds that we're not familiar with. I can't even tell you how many times I personally have experienced hearing something crashing through the woods that sounds rather large, only to turn around and see that it's just a squirrel. It's pretty wild how much noise those little guys can make. But that being said, when you hear what sounds like a tree being twisted apart, and also a tree being slid down a mountain toward you, sure, it could definitely be somebody playing a prank on you or just messing around out in the woods. But the number of stories where people recount experiencing something very similar while they're out in a very, very remote wilderness kind of lead you to wonder if there's anything to these stories as far as there being some sort of bipedal, ape-like creature out there in the woods of western North Carolina, and seemingly all over the country and all over the world for that matter. Not to mention, you'd be hard-pressed to find a culture that doesn't mention something that sounds almost like a Sasquatch. Cherokee legends talk about the woolly ones. You may have heard terms like the Yeti, the Yowie, the Wendigo, and with Sasquatch becoming such a cultural icon that pretty much everybody knows what a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch is, it does beg the question, could these things be real? And if they don't exist anymore, did they at one time? Well, we may never know the answer to that question, but there's no doubt that every single year, more and more similar reports to these come out every day. So who knows? Maybe it's a man, maybe it's a myth, maybe it's nothing at all. But try telling that to people that have claimed to see this creature. You know, Austin, one thing's for sure. I've got to stop taking those low-grade beaver tranquilizers before I do story time.
It gets real trippy around here. But I'm not complaining. I enjoy it.
Over here Bob Rossing it. All right, man. I had heard of Sasquatch encounters in western North Carolina, for sure.
Yeah.
One thing I was completely unaware of was that apparently Madison County just happens to be this ridiculous hotbed of, if nothing else, reports of seeing Sasquatch. Were you aware of this?
I was not aware of that until really this week when we were digging into the story and learning the location was specific to Madison County and trying to find other things that kind of go along with this. And God, there's a lot more than I would have thought. Just kind of labeling Madison County as really like a hotspot or a hotbed for Sasquatch sightings, which is something, we thought we would have heard of if that was the case.
Yeah, and sorry if I'm jumping the gun with this, but you texted me earlier and you found out that Madison County essentially has its own Bigfoot organization.
Yeah, so in digging through some of the stuff specific to Madison County and Bigfoot Sasquatch research, they actually have something known as the Madison County Bigfoot organization that's ran by a fellow named Jeffrey Jameson. He actually also has a podcast called the Cryptids in Your Backyard podcast. Doesn't seem like it's been active in the past couple of years, but still seems like he's been kind of doing some boots on the ground research in his own backyard, dealing with this subject specifically.
Hell yeah. Well, I mean, even if he hasn't really been active with the podcast, I would definitely like to check that out. Cause I mean, dude, I'm sure there's a ton of information about this stuff that we probably haven't heard yet. So
yeah, for sure. They have a public Facebook group, kind of joined that and scrolled through it today. I think, again, kind of like the podcast seemed a little bit more active in previous years, but people still share some cool Bigfoot memes on there, I guess.
If nothing else, you got the cool memes.
For sure. And I think, like you mentioned, like Sasquatch, Bigfoot has become kind of like a cultural icon for so many places. And even, in Western North Carolina, like I mentioned, my parents live in Brevard. City of Brevard uses the Sasquatch as their recycling mascot now.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. That's cool.
Leave no trace. Makes sense, right?
Oh, wow. That's actually really good marketing.
Good marketing, right?
That's super cool.
Yeah, there's coasters passed out. I see them everywhere. And that's kind of like the branding that they've really embraced there.
That's awesome. Well, I'm assuming they probably keep some Boojum beers on tap over there in Brevard, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, kind of going along with the theme.
Yeah. So as far as the story that came from our family friend Bruce, I'm assuming you probably had never heard that one, but isn't that kind of a creepy story?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, hearing it from you is the first time I'd heard that, but it's interesting because this kind of, I won't say it's a trope, but you do hear more commonly than you would think sometimes of these Sasquatch type figures stealing livestock.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like that's probably more specific to the Appalachian region than a lot of your other common Bigfoot kind of areas and locations. Like you don't hear of them going and stealing chickens in the Pacific Northwest as commonly as you do down in the South.
Yeah. You also don't have a lot of big city Bigfoot sightings.
Yeah, true.
Bigfoot does Dallas.
There is that Instagram account called, is it Bigfoot in Miami that follows us? And it's just all AI generated images of Bigfoot partying up at South Beach.
Yeah, I think I've seen some of that.
But anyways, what kind of came to my mind when we're talking about this kind of like livestock stealing entity is something else kind of has ties to the Bigfoot legend in the Appalachian region. And that's kind of what we touched on some in the Boojum episode, but talking specifically about the wild or feral people that some people have associated or claimed to live in this area.
Yeah, and I think the first time that I ever even heard about the idea of some of these instances not being Sasquatch attributed and it being this idea of feral people living out in the woods, I think actually either was right around the time or was when I stumbled upon the work of David Paulides. And when I say stumbled upon, I mean, I think at the time I was doing the podcast, The Gralien Report, with my brother. And I think that was right around the time that he started to find some of David's work. And he became, Micah kind of went down the rabbit hole with that sort of stuff because a lot of those missing 411 things, I mean, quite a few of them have happened right here in the Appalachian Mountains.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, David Paulides is known for this missing 411 series that we referenced. And it's basically kind of a lot of missing cold case, open-ended disappearances that he focuses on. And a lot of them, as Caleb mentioned, are close to this area. A lot of them do kind of deal with the Great Smoky Mountain National Park or national parks in general. I think that's kind of a common theme about disappearances in these national parks that have kind of raised some speculation and people trying to whether they're drawing straws or trying to draw connections to, maybe something to do with these Bigfoot type entities or feral people, playing some part in these disappearances.
Well, kind of like how we were talking about on our episode about the occult in Asheville, and we're kind of talking about people starting to kind of, put the pins in the corkboard and draw the yarn to the different ones about different stuff, because in a lot of these missing person cases that David Paulides really started getting into, there actually were some kind of what I would describe as just strange behaviors as far as the bureaucratic entities associated with some of the search efforts.
Yeah.
And I think that when you have, just like weird things, like, them, calling off certain search efforts quickly, or like the FBI showing up and weird stuff like that. And then the FBI being like super tight-lipped about things, which, typically they are. But it always seems like when you have a missing persons case, it's like, why do you need the FBI involved with that? So I think it kind of gets the gears turning with people.
Yeah. And what comes to mind when you're bringing this up is one that, is an older case, but I think it's one that David Paulides kind of really revitalized and brought more present day attention to. And that's the case of Dennis Martin.
Yeah. And that happened at Cades Cove in the Nantahala National Forest, right?
Was that Nantahala or was that the Great Smoky Mountain?
That might have been in the Great Smoky Mountains. I get all those things mixed up.
Well, the Nantahala National Forest kind of is right there. It's kind of north of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. They probably border up against each other. So I think there's probably some commonality between some of those lands, if I had to guess.
The bro and I drove like right by it, like not too long ago. I think we were like coming into the Nantahala, and I think that Micah was like, yeah, if you turn up this way, then that's essentially where the Dennis Martin thing happened. And, Micah has actually gone up to where Dennis Martin disappeared. And the Great Smoky Mountain National Forest up there and the Nantahala, I had never really been through there until recently, to my knowledge.
Okay.
And dude, you and I have got to go up there because it is some of the weirdest mountain terrain. That's the thing about the mountains around here is like, you don't get one flavor.
Yeah.
you get like 30 different flavors.
Yeah,
like
you get the Chimney Rock Lake Lure area.
exactly. That's just what I was going to say is like Mount Pisgah looks completely different than Lake Lure. The Nantahala National Forest looks completely different terrain-wise than either of those two. So it's just, I don't know, it's just a weird-ass mountain range,
Yeah,
dude.
for sure. And to back up here a little bit, for those who might not be familiar with the Dennis Martin case in general, that was a tragic case that happened in 1969 where a 6-year-old boy basically kind of vanished from under the tip of his family's nose when they were camping in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. There was, I think this has become kind of a touchstone for search and rescue missions. I think they use this as an example of kind of what not to do in the situation, because from my understanding, when this happened, they got flooded in with so many volunteers, inexperienced volunteers that were just coming with good intentions, allegedly good intentions to help support the cause. But at the same time, you're getting hundreds of people up there with, little to no search and rescue experience. And I think you're probably putting too many cooks in the kitchen for a situation like that.
Probably so. It is pretty strange that when you have that many people out looking that, they weren't able to find him.
Yeah. I think from what I'd seen, and I'd have to ask my dad about this because this probably happened, shortly before the time that he was going to forestry school. But I think they kind of use this as a case study of what to not do in these situations. Like they list off things that went wrong and could have hindered the investigation. And I'm sure this might have been used as an example for him when he was kind of learning the ropes.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons that, we wanted to kind of talk about David Paulides and, obviously cases like the Dennis Martin case. And believe me, if you have not looked at David's work and looked at some of the missing 411 stuff that he's done, it is vast and it is very, very, very strange. I know that you have.
Yeah, it's very eye-opening. And what's interesting about David's work is like he's very well known for his missing 411 stuff, but he also kind of has this side interest in Sasquatch Bigfoot research. And, you got to think for a guy like him, he's looking at the overall Venn diagram picture of this, trying to find maybe where there's some overlap on this. But it is interesting that he, has been able to find some of these things that might be a bit of that overlap he was looking for.
Yeah, and I think for anybody that has spent enough time researching Sasquatch and also these missing person cases, I think that it's kind of easy to tie that thread together because there are multiple instances where people will, it's just the evidence, the trail of evidence that people kind of leave when they disappear can be so incredibly strange. I don't remember exactly the name of the missing person, but there was one story where this guy had gone missing and he took off his hiking boots, and the terrain in which he is having to traverse from where they found his body, compared to where his hiking boots were found, it's nothing but jagged rocks for miles. And this dude's body was miles away from where his boots were found. How was he even able to physically walk that far? And so again, it's kind of this idea of like, okay, well then were his boots moved? Like what?
Yeah.
And when they found him, I think they were set like side by side, like somebody had just taken them. Yeah. It's not like they found a boot off in the wilderness somewhere and then they found another one off somewhere else. So again, there are just so many instances in these missing 411 cases where it's like, okay, I'm not saying it's Sasquatch, but seriously, what the hell went on here?
Right. And I guess to jump back specifically to the Dennis Martin case, there was another witness that was visiting the park on the same day that Dennis Martin went missing. Granted, it was another part of the park he was visiting, but when interviewed, he claimed to have seen a really rough-looking person moving through the woods who appeared to be carrying something over his shoulder and appeared to not want to be seen. And I think this kind of led to this rise in speculation about the possibility of these wild feral people living deep within the woods.
Yeah. And I mean, that is not an uncommon thing.
Yeah.
It's not the most common thing, but especially back before you had the internet and Starlink and things like that. We spoke on, I think, our Boojum episode about Eric Rudolph, the Olympic Park bomber who was hiding out from authorities, and he literally lived in the woods and at night would go out and dumpster dive and find food and stuff like that. So, I mean, you do have feral people living in the woods. I don't think it happens quite as much now. I think these days you have communes of squatters.
Yeah, for sure. But in this case, even the park ranger at the time, he even admitted that he knew of people kind of living off the grid deep in the park. Whether that kind of is the same idea of these feral people. And when we're describing these feral people, what the kind of legends commonly describe their appearance as is pretty similar to a Sasquatch. They're large, they're covered in hair, and they seem to be, fairly beast-like qualities that they resemble. And they also appear to move pretty quickly from some of the reports we've seen.
Yeah, I've definitely heard a lot of, I guess I would kind of lump these in with, Sasquatch reports where these entities are described as more of like feral people that are just a little bit more hairy than regular people, a little bit more scraggly.
Yeah.
But I do believe that I have heard reports of them actually looking slightly different in the face.
I think I've seen that too, like a different subspecies almost.
Yeah, I mean, kind of almost, for a lack of a better example, they kind of have the more protruding eyebrow line, like the Geico caveman, the traditional Geico caveman, just features like that,
Yeah. I think I've definitely seen that. This, a lot of these are illustrations that you're seeing of that, but I've definitely seen that kind of common thread on that. And, I think with these specific, the feral people legend, you hear a little bit more association with them being the ones that are known for kind of snatching the small children or snatching the livestock, which is kind of what brought that to mind when you brought up the story from Bruce specifically.
Yeah, and I don't discount the idea, and I'm not saying that Bruce is lying or he didn't see what he saw.
And I'm not either.
But I will say, at some point in history, there has been a human being that went and stole somebody else's livestock late in the evening. It's just had to have happened, and I think it's just something to keep in the back of your mind. And when it comes to Bigfoot, it's very much the same thing for me as ghosts and the paranormal. I have experienced strange things. I haven't really experienced maybe only one thing that I would ever think that was even just slightly Bigfoot related.
Mm-hmm.
But until, we have the evidence, I still remain skeptical. However, my interest in it is vast, and God, I would love for Sasquatch to be a species that existed on this planet, because I love everything about it. I love everything about the myth. I love I don't know. We had our Boojum episode, and the Boojum in the realm of folklore is actually quite different than the Bigfoot.
Yeah, I think the Boojum is heavily inspired by Bigfoot sightings and Bigfoot lore, but that was a, Appalachian folklore take to try to create their own specific cryptid based off some of this Bigfoot mythology.
Yeah, but Bigfoot, if the Sasquatch does exist, that's the real deal. Living off the land, out there in the woods, providing he or she is not interdimensional, and also some form of alien, which a lot of people speculate that is the case. And I mean, I don't know, man.
I've seen theories ranging from, Bigfoot being some sort of interdimensional being to him being almost like a pet of the aliens. And then I
almost brought that up because that's another thing. I mean, it's kind of like Chewbacca.
Yeah, exactly. I've also seen theories that Bigfoot's a tulpa. It's a thought projection, which, that is much in the public psyche and sphere as he is. I guess that would kind of make sense for the concept.
That would explain very much why he is the hide and seek champion
everywhere. Yeah. True.
And disappears.
Just
quickly.
So yeah, and I think there does, bleed into this concept, some of these feral people. And just kind of to wrap that up, I've seen a few different names that people have referred to these people, the feral people, by, and that's ridge runners or ridge hoppers. So I tried to dig a little more into some of these names, and actually found a book specific to Western North Carolina called Ridge Hoppers that was written by someone going by the name Stone Owl. So after some digging, I found out that Stone Owl is actually Daniel or Danny Warren.
Why do I know that name?
Joshua P. Warren's dad.
You gotta be kidding me.
We cannot escape the Warren verse.
Well, that is incredible, because until today, and I'll bleep that out, but until today, I was completely unaware that Danny Warren had written a book on Sasquatch, because I hung out a lot with Danny Warren back in the day when I was part of the Lemur team, and Josh's mom, Peggy, and gosh almighty, of course, Danny Warren would, eventually get into the Sasquatch game. So what year did this come out?
Actually, I didn't find the year on it. I think it was pretty independently published through his website.
Yeah.
But I think it was sometime roughly around 2022 is what I'm guessing.
Okay.
Because that's around the time I started seeing some of the interviews pop up around it.
Okay.
But looking at the title of the name, Ridge Hoppers, I thought this was going to be more of a book specific to kind of the feral people we alluded to. But looking over the description, it's more of kind of a fictionalized account of stories that Danny has heard passed down through his family for generations that have been in this area for generations. And they're actually more specific to the little people. So I ordered a copy of that for research for future episodes on that subject.
Oh, nice.
So
the ever-growing research on the little people.
Exactly. So yeah, I did think that was kind of an interesting little side quest to go down, but I found something a little more synchronicitous on that site when I was digging through and actually found that Danny himself hosted a Bigfoot hotspot retreat in the middle of Madison County just a couple years ago. It seems like, this was kind of feeding into that lore of Madison County just being known as this hub for Bigfoot sightings. Seems like they hosted a big camping trip, 2 days, 2 nights. They went out on some expeditions through the woods. They got Christian McLeod, who's kind of a Bigfoot tracking expert guide who's worked on a few different, international TV shows, radio shows. And he was able to come and host the expeditions through that night. So don't know if they found anything. I feel like I would have seen something about that, but seems like a fun time either way.
That's pretty cool, man. Well, since you're bringing up a little bit about the lore of the Cherokee Little People, one of the stories that we're going to go over when we eventually do that episode has to do with an area that's kind of out that way. And oddly enough, well, I will just call them a paranormal occurrence. There was supposedly also Sasquatch sightings in this place.
Oh, yeah. I think you did tell me about this. Yeah.
And so I never heard firsthand any of the experiences or the sightings that anybody claimed to see of Sasquatch in this specific area. But I did hear a story that is very, very strange. I'll tell that when we have all of the pieces put together, but I just wanted to throw that out there that, that was another reported Bigfoot sighting essentially in the same area here.
Are you talking about Thomas Divide area?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, this is different.
Okay, because if we're talking Thomas Divide, when I was talking to Micah on that area before, showing him some of the pictures I got up there, first thing he says just casually is, oh yeah, some guy told me he's a whole Bigfoot just crossing the road by the overlook.
Dude, so the story we had earlier when I was doing my Bob Ross voice, again, these are just people that are posting on the blog. There's no way to, really vet these sources.
Yeah, but you got to think, like, if you're posting on a blog, it's not tied to your real name. It's fairly anonymous. Like, you're not getting any credibility, notoriety from this. So unless you just get a rush from making up bullshit. Like,
yeah, and some people do. Some people just like to troll, no doubt. But I will say that some of these posts are oddly specific.
Yeah. I
mean, talking about almost hitting a Bigfoot on the frickin' interstate.
Right.
I mean, that's fine if you want to make that up, but I don't know. It's just like the way that it was written didn't really seem to me like they were just trolling.
Yeah. Jumping back to Danny Warren when he was doing some of those interviews promoting the book and this expedition, he had a pretty wild story about hitting something of unknown hairy origins when driving through Maggie Valley one night. So
the skunk ape.
The skunk.
Emphasis on skunk. No, just kidding.
Well, the thing about Maggie Valley too is when you're driving through there, that's pretty heavy elk crossing area. So it's if you're not the best at seeing late at night driving and you see something big like that, I could see how your eyes could play some tricks on you.
Have you seen an elk around here since they reintroduced them?
Yeah, we actually saw them one of the last times we were driving over Soco Gap going to Harrah's right there by Catalucci.
When we went?
Yeah, when we went. I think I've got a picture of it. Yeah, I'll show it to you.
I've seen elk when I was in Colorado, but I have never seen one in North Carolina since they reintroduced them.
It was literally right there by the entrance to Catalucci.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, right by the elk crossing sign. Ironic enough.
Wow, there you go. A little on the nose, but okay. Almost as though someone placed it there.
Right. So yeah, jumping back to Madison County, like just seeing how much of this kind of kept tying back to this area being the hotspot for Sasquatch in our area, I just wanted to continue digging to see what else I could find specific to that. And there's a few things. I found the Sasquatch Manor on Airbnb, or Luxury and Nature Collide, which is a Bigfoot-themed log cabin, Airbnb in Marshall.
Well, I know where we're staying
right?
next time.
And that's when we lead that expedition.
Yeah.
We have our home quarters all set.
You, me, and the lady. I mean, I assume it'll be big enough for 4 people, but...
Yeah, it looked like, I think it said it had 4 bedrooms, so
okay,
we could fit a crew.
Well, then the bros coming too.
Hey. So yeah, I also mentioned I stumbled upon the Madison County Bigfoot organization, which I thought was pretty cool. Like,
That's badass, dude. That's amazing.
yeah, to be able to incorporate over something like that and just kind of like it enriches the area, but it still kind of builds community around something strange and unexplained. And, Madison County isn't a huge area. So to have that many people sharing this common interest in the Bigfoot there is really cool to see.
Well, we might have to vie for our membership.
Right. Yeah.
Be kind of cool to be part of something like that.
Honorary member.
Yeah. Even though we're not Madison County, we're close enough, damn it.
I mean, we're hopping a skip down the road.
That's right.
Found a few other things. There was a 2015 article from the Blue Ridge Outdoors website, and that claims that Bigfoot reports have been frequent in Madison County since the first homesteaders set up permanent residence in the hollows. So, I don't know exactly where the sources are coming from, but you got to think there's enough old Appalachian tales that have been passed down from generations about stuff like that. I think what I started to see when I was seeing those kind of firsthand accounts is the older generations, kind of from the 1920s, 1930s, seemed like they would refer to this being as the monkey man. Did you see that terminology thrown around?
I have heard the monkey man before. The one that I think I mentioned in the dramatization earlier was the woolly ones.
The woolly ones, yeah.
And that was something that Micah heard straight from a Cherokee tribe member when he went there. And we mentioned this, a long while back in the podcast. Well, we don't have a super long while back, but it was one of the first episodes. But that's another area that really, really I find so interesting is the Cherokee lore about this stuff. Because, they speak, as far as I know, pretty frequently about a Sasquatch-like entity.
Yeah. I found a site that has a few different kind of Bigfoot-like creatures that have kind of come up in Cherokee mythology. And I apologize again. I feel so bad if I butcher these names, but I'm learning and trying to be respectful as I can on this. But there's one that is called the Nun Yunwi, similar to the Yunwei Junsti. I could see the the commonality and the inflections there, but that actually translates to stone man, which is kind of a big, tall stone figure in Cherokee culture. Yeah,
a golem of sorts.
Yeah, exactly. And there's another called the Shekla Kedla, which translates to hairy savage. So I think that's kind of on the nose. These are actually ones that the Blue Ridge Outdoors magazine listed in that article where they cited Madison County as this hotspot.
That to me, what did you say it translates to? Hairy savage?
Hairy savage, yeah.
That almost to me sounds more like a feral woodsman.
Yeah, agreed.
Than, something that they would potentially identify as being a separate species. You know what I mean?
Yeah, agreed. For sure. So I thought that was kind of interesting to have, not only us drawing these common threads back to Cherokee culture, but, other people have seen the commonality between somewhere where these Cherokee legends start to bleed into these Sasquatch tales as well.
Yeah. Micah, myself, and Brian Irish of the Lemur team, I'll just say one more time, Lemur team is a paranormal investigation group that was formed by Joshua P. Warren. But we went out into Cherokee to do a Bigfoot expedition. And we went hiking up the Canady Fork Trail there. And we'll tie this into, I'll go into a little bit about some weirdness we experienced. But we did kind of hear this, not wood knocking, but it almost sounded like a drum beating distantly down in the woods.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this some in the Boojum episode.
Yeah.
And I think we had recently come off something where we were talking about the Yunwei Junsti, and I think I might have brought that up, that kind of sounds like the little people because they're known for the rhythmically drumming patterns.
Well, we'll get into this more when we get into the little people thing, but yes, that is some lore that is attributed to the Yunwei Junsti, the Cherokee little people, and they say that if you hear a drum being played far off in the distant woods, do not follow this because it will lead you to their home. And, this happened when I was probably 16 or 17 years old. I had never heard that kind of lore. So now when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, oh my God, dude.
Right. You might have heard something.
and people might think, well, sure, anybody could be playing a drum out late at night. As far as we were out in the Canady Fork Trail in the middle of the night, I don't think it's impossible that it was just somebody out and they have a property that was, somewhere close to that. But we were like pretty far on out there. I mean, we're basically out like hiking in the mountains, like in the parkway. I mean, that's the kind of territory. So I will say it was a little odd.
Yeah, for sure. And, like you mentioned, that's basically right going through Maggie Valley, some of the areas we talked about before. So
Exactly. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So I guess, which I know you used as a resource for kind of the intro to the episode, but I do think that blog post, whatever you want to call it, from the UNC library website that cites that Citizen Times article that reports as Madison County is this Bigfoot hotspot, that's coming from an accredited, probably the accredited university when people think of North Carolina. So like the fact that this is coming from somewhat of a scholarly website is kind of just adds some credibility to the fact that maybe not this topic of Bigfoot and Sasquatch itself, but just the legend and lore around it, specifically being tied to Madison County.
Yeah, and if nothing else, I mean, again, we could straight attribute every single one of these posts to just people, just trolling and BSing on the internet. But to me, it was frankly rather shocking how many people flocked to this post to tell whatever story about this crazy shit that they had experienced.
Right.
I was expecting maybe 2 or 3 comments, my mamaw saw one back in the day, blah, blah, blah. Dude, there is a substantial amount of people commenting on this stuff with stories.
Yeah, and I was diving through. I kind of started looking to find some of these common threads, with Hot Springs being that town that's kind of say the most frequently mentioned and tied to a lot of the stuff that we've seen.
Yeah.
Start kind of, keyword searching for ones that are mentioning Hot Springs. And there's, quite a few. And within those, there are quite a few that mention a specific area in Hot Springs itself. And that being the Rocky Bluff Campground. There's one story that says, I was camping at Rocky Bluff Campground near Hot Springs around 1989, 1990. In the middle of the night, I heard 2 loud calls coming from the river. Unlike coyote, bobcat, cougar, bear, deer, elk, or anything that I have knowledge of. Made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I've always wondered what it could have been. I now do think it was a Bigfoot. Going to another one. This is very short, sweet, and to the point, but saw one. Rocky Bluff Campground near Hot Springs. Hey, cool. Yeah, that covers everything I need. There's another one that gets a little bit out there. I visited a meditation retreat years ago in Hot Springs. During the full moon, my mom and I hiked up a mountain. I heard a noise I never heard before. We laid down on the knoll to see the sky, and I heard a 2-footed creature running behind me. And then I felt a kiss on my wrist with a wet nose. I got scared, and we left. But now I know it was just a baby Bigfoot.
Or the boojum.
Right? Was that from Annie?
Because he likes that smacking to the lips. Well, real quick, I will just bring up to you. I mean, I'm assuming you and I have both heard just droves of the purported Sasquatch calls.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you going to demonstrate one for us here?
Let me get a couple more Guinness in me, bro. I'll just do my boojum. Oh! But it's kind of interesting hearing some of those vocalization recordings because unless they are variants of calls that are infrequent, that are made by certain wild animals that maybe they don't do all the time, maybe there's something physically different about, a coyote or a wolf or a moose, or there's some sort of, I don't know, random thing that makes it sound different than other vocalizations of other animals. There's definitely a few of those recordings that I've heard where I'm like, that does not sound like anything I've ever heard before. And I don't like sit and just scroll YouTube and go, okay, what's a moose call sound like?
Right.
I don't know. Some of them do sound, number one, super bizarre. And secondarily, like whatever animal is making it would have to have like this massive frame and this massive, wind capacity.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what is your take on any of that stuff?
I'm right there with you. I think I was going to jump back to something that we brought up in the intro was the Sierra sounds that were used as a recording.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're not familiar, that's, pretty described in the intro, but it's recordings of these alleged Bigfoot vocalizations. And the fact that they use that to draw a response out of whatever they were communicating with is pretty damn interesting to me.
I do think that's interesting. And I unfortunately am also just going to jump over to the skeptic side of it too, because again, now here you have this report and obviously these people are aware of Bigfoot. They've brought out the CD, they're playing this stuff. They are admittedly getting a little bit spooked and that sort of thing. I don't think it's completely impossible that a family member was messing with them.
Fair enough.
And did that. Because, that to me is the most plausible explanation for what that would be.
Yeah.
Do I want that to be the most plausible explanation? No, not in the least. I want it to be a damn Sasquatch. And I will say also, I'm going to start calling myself Caleb, and I will say, because I have to edit the podcast, and I hear myself say that shit every time. So many times. But I will say that it is pretty interesting that this took place in this area that, as we know now, has had Sasquatch reports going back to the late 50s.
Yeah, and I mean, like, even before that, like I alluded to with some of these reports from, been orally passed down from like the 20s and 30s, where they were referring it as the monkey man. They were tales about not letting their children or anyone go out alone at night in an area that was ironically right between Marshall and Hot Springs, because the monkey man would get them. And damn if that wasn't pretty much the exact location of Walnut.
Well, and I've only been through Hot Springs a handful of times in my life, but
yeah,
some kind of weird terrain up there too.
Yeah,
it gets pretty remote pretty quick.
It does. It definitely it's backwoods living. Hot Springs is a really interesting town. I actually used to work a beer sales route through there, so I was pretty much there every week. Got to know people within the community. Small town, everyone kind of knows each other. But I think what's so interesting and unique about that is it's like the only town that the Appalachian Trail goes directly through. So they're just catering to all these through hikers constantly throughout the year. They're just getting an influx of different people hiking through, using that as kind of like a resource stop, whether they're stopping just to get a nice meal, to get a shower, or just to kind of restock on some supplies. It's kind of a nice kind of, they call it like a sanctuary town or something like that along the trail.
Yeah, that's cool. I can't remember the name of the place that we played, but the bluegrass band that the bro and I had for the longest time, Nitro Grass, we played at some venue up there, and it almost looked like it was, I don't know, it almost looked like it was part of like a school or something, but they were like...
Spring Creek Tavern, maybe?
No, it was a private event. It was like an event center, but it was very old. They had like some libraries. I remember the place being pretty big, but it had like a little amphitheater in there.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Okay. Yeah. Hot Springs isn't that big. It's kind of on the main stretch off to the left there.
Yeah, I don't remember what that was, but I remember being in there and like looking out the windows, and it was all foggy and stuff outside. It's the middle of summer, and just being like, man, this place is just, it's just like out of a damn storybook. It's just so like wooded and crazy looking. It is off the beaten path, like you said.
Yeah, for sure. It is a cool, very tight-knit community too, but like it gets pretty damn hot there in the summer, like you mentioned. Like
I bet.
It kind of bakes down there in that valley.
Well, were there some other stories of note that you had that you wanted to bring up there?
I mean, I don't know if I've got anything too much of note. There's a few other stories here. But there's nothing. A lot of these kind of allude to hearing sounds, to maybe interacting with some of these whoops and calls, or maybe hearing something stomping through the woods. But I didn't find too many other examples of someone just straight up seeing a Sasquatch Bigfoot creature face to face. In Madison County, at least. I think there are some other accounts of kind of other areas of Western North Carolina, but I think Madison County, of the specific ones that I found, I think we kind of covered a majority of that.
Well, if we do become honorary members of the Madison County Bigfoot Research Faction, maybe we can plot out some areas that we could actually get out into the woods and, I don't know, just do a little hiking, scope some of the areas, just kind of get an idea of the lay of the land out there.
Yeah.
Because, again, with this being such an unknown to us hotspot of reported Bigfoot activity, why not? It's right down the road.
Yeah,
might as well
exactly.
just go check out some of these remote areas. I still got to take you down to Stackhouse, because that place is really, really, really cool. It's basically where the French Broad River comes out of the mountains. It's like, it's like the raw ore of what the French Broad River becomes, and it does not disappoint up there, dude.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, we'll have to book the Sasquatch Manor for a weekend sometime.
Oh, hell yeah. I'm so down. Well, if that's all we got with that.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I did find, because Bruce in his story kind of described this creature as sloth-like. I was just seeing if there's other sloth-type entity reportings there. And the only thing I really found was just articles on Safari Adventure. You familiar with that? It was a little basically tropical wildlife sanctuary up there. They had some kangaroos. They had some sloths.
Where was this?
It was in Marshall, but then they got in trouble for not having the correct permitting to basically run a public zoo type operation.
Yeah, that checks.
Yeah, weird story. They actually had a place in Miami. Adriana knew them from Miami and then saw they opened up here. So we went up there years ago. It was cool. I got to see, you can get to pet a kangaroo, hand feed a kangaroo.
It wasn't Doc Antel from Tiger King, was it?
No, it wasn't that. But it was definitely a little tucked away. And from what I understood on some of these reports, they got in trouble from some permitting. But, that was the only other connection to a sloth in Madison County, a famous sloth in Madison County that I could find.
Well, I will leave you with a couple of strange notes because, that's our beat.
Yeah, there we go.
Number one, I could be lying to you, but I'm fairly certain I'm not. I ate a kangaroo in Linville Caverns.
Okay, I don't quite know the connection there, but all right.
When I was a kid in the 4th grade, we did a field trip to the Linville Caverns, which is essentially right below where the Brown Mountain Lights happen.
Yep.
And they had this assortment of really bizarre, exotic to the people of the mountains of WNC. They just had this exotic array of beef jerky. And I remember one of them being rattlesnake.
Uh-huh.
I am almost certain they had ostrich and kangaroo. Now, I don't know if you can eat a kangaroo, so maybe I'm lying to you, but my little mind back in the day remembers there being kangaroo. I might just be confusing it with ostrich and not knowing what different animals were.
They're in the outback, right?
But I'm going to go with I ate a kangaroo in Linville Gorge, and maybe somebody will make a bumper sticker out of that. Now here's another weird one. All right.
Okay.
If we're talking about cryptids in this area, this is a little further out. This is Cherokee, but this also does tie into something kind of like what you're talking about. This potential sloth coming up here to the mountains of western North Carolina, it gets loose, and then maybe somebody sees what they end up describing as a cryptid.
Yeah, that was kind of the thought I had at first, but the timelines clearly don't match. Like, this is more something that happened in, 2018.
Sure. So, I don't know if the timelines match up with this, and this is a pretty tenuous story, but I thought it was relatively funny. Now, this is an actual reported cryptid story that I've heard. There was this dude that told, I won't name names other than Phyllis Galdi, who used to own Fate magazine.
Okay.
I love Fate magazine. It's a staple in the paranormal world. It's incredible, and I love Phyllis. I've spent a decent amount of time with her. I haven't seen her in years, but every time I did hang out with her, she was just such a sweetheart. There was this story about this guy who was hitchhiking through Cherokee, North Carolina, and it was nighttime. The moon was out, and he said he saw what he would describe as being almost exactly what was reported in Scapor Swamp in South Carolina, the alleged lizard man.
Yeah.
A bipedal reptilian lizard cryptid. But he said that he had a bullwhip with him, and he saw this thing, and he whipped his bullwhip at it. And he said that the thing caught the end of the bullwhip in its teeth and ripped the tip off and spit it out and took off.
Okay.
And so he grabs the rest of this bullwhip and, brings it back in his...
Oh, that's his evidence?
Yeah, showing it as this relic.
Yeah.
Now, here's what came to mind because of your story about bringing this sloth into North Carolina. When you've been driving through Bryson City, do you remember the reptilian exhibit? Do you know what I'm talking about?
The billboard for it, you mean?
So when you're leaving Bryson City and you're headed back towards Asheville, down on your right, there are these buildings, and I don't know, I doubt that they're still there now, but back in probably 2005 or 6, they were definitely there.
Okay.
But they had these buildings that were some sort of reptilian exhibit, and I think they had some alligators and some different stuff.
Yeah.
If they were lucky, they had a frickin' Gila monster in there. But my tie-in here is, what if this dude, because this I think took place around late 80s, early 90s. What if something escaped from that reptilian exhibit there in Bryson City, and that dude just ran into a frickin' Gila monster in the middle of the night?
I mean, it's interesting how, some of those escaped, whatever you want to call them, circus animals, show animals could grow in the wild a lot bigger than they do in captivity, I would assume.
I mean, I dated this girl that lived in Ohio, and when we went back to meet the parents and all that, They told me about this guy who essentially had the same thing that you're talking about, where they had all these exotic animals. And
Yeah.
they said that every once in a while, people in Ohio would look out in their field and there would be a friggin' lion running, like a full-grown male lion running out through their field, and be like, what? and these things would escape all the time. So I'm just saying, this crap does happen,
For
dude.
sure. I just got reminded of one specific to Asheville with the the Biltmore Village area. Is there was some report, I can't remember the exact time frame or what it was, but these people claimed to have seen this interdimensional being that resembled a kangaroo somewhere in the Biltmore Village, and then come to find out George Vanderbilt was just keeping freaking kangaroos up on his estate, and
There
one of
you
them
go.
just hopped down to the village. And, you know, if you're a resident of Asheville, you've probably never seen one in person, specifically around that time. So,
I mean, dude, while we're on the subject, there have been multiple instances documented throughout history where circus monkeys have escaped.
for sure, yeah, that's one of the, I mean, not the monkey part, but the lore around Brevard and the white squirrels was that was a kind of an escaped circus animal at the time, and that they broke free and have just managed to start their own community within Transylvania County.
I mean, dude, I would not be surprised that some of the Sasquatch reports from back in the day actually were because orangutan escaped from the frickin' circus.
Yeah, you're talking the monkey man.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't find that to be tenuous because there's so many reports of Sasquatch. There are documented cases where this has happened. So I'm not saying that that's every Sasquatch, but I mean, it has happened.
Yeah, it has to account for some of them.
Indeed. Well, on that note, we will stop boring you with speculative ideas of escaped creatures from strange encampments, but I will just leave you with this thought. Do I know if Madison County is actually a hotbed of Sasquatch activity? I definitely do not. But the idea of the whole thing really actually does intrigue me quite a bit because there's a lot of reports. So why not look into it? It's right down the road.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it does add some credence that I would not have thought of Madison County as a Sasquatch hotspot until you told me that's where the story took place. And lo and behold, as you dive into it, there's a lot more of that in that same specific region of Madison County.
Dude, when we started this thing, did we not say one of the biggest reasons we started this is because the western North Carolina mountains are weird as hell and full of crazy stuff?
Yeah, and boy, we weren't wrong.
Boy, did we bet on the right horse, because this place just gets weirder and weirder. Well, either way, thank you everybody for listening to Ghosts in the Mountains. Please check us out on ghostinthemountains.com. If you would like to subscribe to us on Patreon, you will have access to an ad-free version of the podcast. We will be introducing a new creature into the world of our merchandise from our Brown Mountain Lights episode, the Wormmander. The creature with the flame on its butt, and I think you're really, really, really going to like this design. So thanks again to everybody who has been supporting the show and listening to what we're doing. We want to keep doing this for you because we love it. So thank you once again. And we will catch you on the next episode of Ghosts in the Mountains. Stay spooky, everybody. You gotta be kidding me.
We cannot escape the Warren verse.